Hi there, this is Jeanette Comerford for Whimsy Stamps. Today I am going to be using Whimsy's Happy Hanukkah clear stamp set to create some cards. I'll be using some embossing and distress ink techniques to create these cards. What I also like about this stamp set is that you're not limited to just using it one time a year. You can use some of the sentiments and the candles to create birthday cards or different types of cards that you can send out throughout the year. So here's the stamp set, and you can see that I used just a few of the stamps that are in the set, and you can certainly make a lot of different types of cards and tags. Here's the watercolor paper I'll be using and some stitched squares that I'll be using to create my cards. The first thing I did was just cut this piece of watercolor paper in half so that I'll be able to run it through my Big Shot using these dies. I'm just measuring the dies here to make sure that I'm cutting it to the right size. Now I'm taking the stamps and I am putting them on my block. I like using these clear stamps because you can position them exactly the way you want them. And I am going to pull out my embossing buddy here, which is an anti-static tool, and my VersaMark. I like to keep those two together in that little case. And I'll just stamp these little images on this small square. And then I'll go ahead and use a larger square, and I'll be stamping all these candles. I've already lined them up on my mount. So I'll just get them covered in VersaMark and stamp them off. So now I'm just cleaning off my stamps. I'm using a baby wipe, and I'm going to take them and I'm going to put them right back onto this piece of acetate because I don't want to lose them. I find that these clear stamps are very easily misplaced, so I'm just putting them right back on so I don't lose them. And I'm just taking out the menorah and I will be stamping that on this smaller square. So now I'm taking some white embossing powder and I will be sprinkling that over on top of the images and tapping off the excess and just making sure that everything is covered. And I'm going to cover all three of my images. Here's the last one here. And then I'll just take them aside and heat emboss them. Next, I'm going to be adding my sentiments, and I had a really sort of clear idea of what I wanted to achieve, the look I wanted to achieve with these cards, and I knew I wanted to have the sentiments stamped in a different color. So I chose a beautiful rich gold color, and I wanted the images to be stamped in white or embossed in white. So I'm just stamping all the images. For the one with the menorah, because there's not a lot of room, I am going to stamp the sentiment on a piece of this scrap watercolor paper, and I will be cutting it out and putting it over top the image. So here is the embossing powder I'm using. It's a WOW embossing powder. It's a metallic gold. And I don't have that stored in a little plastic case, so I've just folded a piece of printer paper here and I'm working on top of that, just making sure that everything is covered with the powder. And if there's any stray powder, I'm just brushing that off with my paintbrush. There was a little edge that wasn't covered, so I just made sure that was all covered. And then I'll just sort of tap the paper so that the embossing powder moves to the center of that fold line and just put it all back in. So I heat embossed them, and now we're moving on to the next step, which is to add the color. So I'm using different colors of distress ink. And I had, as I said before, a really clear idea of what I wanted these cards to look like. So I am just going to put a little bit of water on them with my little mini mister. And I am going to take a flat paintbrush, and I'll just brush that over on top of the paper. And I'll pick up a piece of acetate and start putting on the ink. I wanted it to look very sort of deconstructed, not very precise. So my first step is to put on the ink using this piece of acrylic, so it looks very natural and not overdone. So I'm just going to clean off my acetate here, and I will remove any excess color with a paper towel. And because I did not want the next color, the blue, to sort of mix in with the yellow and lose that glow that I have at the top, I took the squares and I just blasted them a little bit with my heat tool to dry the ink. And this way you can see when I'm adding the next color, it doesn't sort of mix in with the yellow and create a green. So again, I'm just using the acetate and various colors of distress ink, which I will list below this video so that you'll know what I've been using. And again, just dabbing it with the paper towel. So this first layer of color is really natural and sort of organic, and that's what I wanted. And I will start building on top of that. So I'll put that aside, and I'll do the same thing here with the candles. And again, just adding it with the acetate and building the blue color so that as it moves down the card, it gets a little bit darker. There is no right or wrong way to do this. This was a lot of fun. It was like I was playing with the ink. What I decided to do was take my mini mister here at this point, and I just sort of sprayed it a little bit to get the colors moving a little bit, because I didn't like how it was looking. So you can see I added a little bit too much there. So I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm going to dab away the excess water. And then I did the same thing over here. I spritzed it with my mini mister, got the color moving a little bit, but made sure that I was tilting it downwards so that the blue didn't mix with the yellow. I did add a little bit more color because I didn't think there was enough contrast there, so I did add some of the darker color so that you could see my embossed image a little bit better. So you can see I'm adding it towards the bottom. I just didn't think it was dark enough. And this is the sort of second layer that's going on top of the first layer. So you still see the sort of natural movements that you got using the piece of acetate, but now I'm adding a sort of second layer of color. So I took those aside, and again I heated them up. And then I thought I would add a little bit more yellow to the top. So I just did that with my paintbrush. So I did that on both of them. And then for this other one, I wanted to have the yellow and the blue, but then I wanted to add another pop of color, and I decided I was just going to use my paintbrush for this one because I did kind of want the colors to mix quite a bit. So this is the third color I'm using, which is Picked Raspberry. Sort of added that on. And there was a little bit extra there, so I just soaked it up with the paper towel. And I spritzed it with the mini mister again. So for these two, again, I wanted to deepen the bottom, so I'm adding a third layer of color. This time I'm sponging it on. This is the peacock feathers I'm using on top of it, and I'm just putting it on the bottom. And then because it was looking a little bit too green, I went and got some chipped sapphire and I added that to the bottom. And then I realized I wasn't working on my craft mat, so I quickly just cleaned off my cutting mat here. I'm just going to cut this sentiment now so that it is going to fit on my card. And I will just assemble the cards. I will list at the bottom also the dimensions of the cards. They're quite small, but I will list them so that you can recreate this if you wish. So this is the one that I'm going to add the sentiment over on top. And this last one is going onto a card base. And you can see my paper, my watercolor paper, is a little bit warped because I was heating it quite a bit, so I just sort of bent it a little bit so it would lay flat. And those are my 3 cards. Thank you so much for watching. A full list of supplies and product links can be found below this video on YouTube or on my blog dated December 7th, 2015.